Hey guys, it's Rocky. Today I will introduce you how to get the English vocabulary like a returnee. English vocabulary like a returnee? Of course that's impossible. That's what you may be thinking. You may be thinking that returnees are very fluent in English and their vocabulary is amazing. However, as a returnee, I assure you, the vocabulary of returnees and Japanese English learners are no different. I was abroad for 4 years in elementary school and I spent junior and high schools in Japan. From my experience, the English vocabulary I learned in junior high school was very easy. However, in high school, there were some non-returning friends who had better vocabulary than I did. So, if we just go by the number of words you know, I didn't think that I was much different from everyone. Strangely enough, even though our vocabulary was the same, I was able to speak English and they weren't able to. Why is this? I wanted to know this, so I did research in university and graduate school, and I learned something very important. 3,000. Do you all know this number? This number is the number of English words learned before high school graduation. And actually, according to one study, if you know 2,800 words, you will be able to understand 92% of English sentences. And 700 of those are called core spoken, and if you know this, you can understand 90% of English conversations. By the way, the number of English words learned in junior high school is 1,200 words. As some of you may have already noticed, this result shows that the number of vocabulary you know wasn't that important for speaking. In fact, those who have learned English in high school already know 90% of English vocabulary, and those who have learned English in middle school already know 90% of English conversation vocabulary. What's more, some people say that in order to pass entrance exams for universities in Japan, you need at least 5,000 words, which is much more than 2,800 words. What I'm trying to say here is that most Japanese people already know enough vocabulary to speak, and also has the potential to speak English. But one big question arises here. Why do Japanese people know sufficient number of vocabulary but cannot speak? The answer is simple. They don't have the vocabulary skills to speak. I can't remember English words. As soon as I learn them, I forget it. I can understand it, but I can't use it. I think there are many people like this. And even though you learn vocabulary at school, you don't learn how to study vocabulary. So you just memorize English words in the normal way and write the English words in translation in the notebook. In the long run, many of you are in the situation that you cannot speak English. For those of you who want to avoid this situation, I made this video for you. I will show you how to acquire the vocabulary to speak like a returnee. Therefore, it is recommended for those who want to use English at work, study abroad, or pass English certification exams. I was never good at vocabulary learning either, but by implementing what I will introduce you today, I was able to pass the first level in Eiken and also the first level of vocabulary proficiency test. And I am also now able to speak French and German. I think everyone knows that learning vocabulary is essential to English learning. Because returnees like me rarely share this kind of English language learning methods, doing this will stand you out from the crowd. I will continue to introduce how to speak like a returnee like this. So if you're interested, please subscribe to my channel. This is the overview of how to learn vocabulary so that you can speak like a returnee. By learning these 2 premises and 3 vocabulary learning methods, you can bring your vocabulary to a solid speaking level. So let's start with the first premise. Let me explain the first premise. I assure you, just by knowing this, your vocabulary learning efficiency will explode. The first premise is that English vocabulary should be learned broadly and shallowly. Let me give you an example. Say you want to learn 100 words in 10 days. Many of you will learn 10 words at a time, but that is very inefficient. This way, after 5 days or so, you will forget what you learned in the first part. Incidentally, based on the famous Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, people forget 67% the next day. This means that even if you do 10 words every day, you will only remember 3 or 4 words the next day. This is not efficient. On the other hand, I recommend a broad and shallow approach. On the first day, you do 100 words, and then do that 10 times. You may not feel like you are understanding the first day you do this, but if you repeat this 10 times, the more you do it, the more it will be ingrained in your brain. The forgetting curve of Ebbinghaus, which I mentioned earlier, says people forget easily. But also, it says that by reviewing, you can retain memory. So, we first need to accept the reality that whether it's 10 or 100 words, people forget. So, what's important is that we really need to be aware of how to review. Please keep this method in mind because this is the foundation of basic vocabulary learning. So, based on this, I will show you 3 specific ways to study vocabulary. But first, let me explain another premise, which is the classification of known English words. Many people think of English vocabulary in 2 axes, whether you know it or you don't. This is not enough because as I explained earlier in this video, if you only think about the number of words you know, Japanese learners and returnees are not that different. If the classification of English vocabulary is only these 2, then Japanese English learners will be able to speak English, won't they? To understand the difference between these 2, we need to classify known English vocabularies more. There are 3 classifications. I know it when I see it, I understand it right away, I can use it. In fact, the 3 study method here correspond with the 3 classification I just explained. So let us begin with the first one. The objective here is to increase the number of I know it when I see it words. You will learn the words by practicing as described in one of the premises. Some of the things to remember are, at this stage, memorizing sounds and meanings are fundamental. Sound memorization might be unfamiliar with you, but it is the process of learning pronunciation of the word. There are so many people who neglect studying pronunciation when learning vocabulary. However, if you don't know how to pronounce the word, you can't listen or speak. Make sure you memorize the sound as well when you learn vocabulary. I once had a student who memorized ashamed as ashamedo. If you remember ashamed as ashamedo, when you hear a native speaker say ashamed, you won't be able to understand it, even though you know the meaning of ashamed. Also, as for meaning memorization, just remember via Japanese translation. The practice is to say English, say Japanese translation, and say English again. For example, if you want to learn the word ashamed, do it like this. Ashamed. 恥ずかしい, ashamed, and go on to the next word. Do this mechanically every day in a broad and shallow way as I have described in the premise. It's important to be exposed to a lot of words, so don't spend too much time on one word. I would say the maximum time doing this would be 100 words for 10 minutes. And I recommend doing it for 5 laps because studies have shown that 5 laps is the most efficient. I recommend using the Pastan Eiken. You can learn vocabulary at your own level and you can also get access to audio. And you can also use an app on your portable phone to practice. I've added the link to the book in the description section, so please check it out. Next, we memorize the word in context. With the practice I just described, you'll be able to get a high score on an English vocabulary test, but this is different from understanding vocabulary in reading and listening. To do this, it is necessary to understand English vocabulary in context. For example, to use the example of ashamed from earlier, you should be ashamed of yourself. If you understand this sentence in one shot, that will be perfect. The simplest way to learn vocabulary in context is to memorize the example sentences that comes in the English vocabulary books. This works to some extent because the words are used in sentences. However, in a real conversation, contexts are not usually only one sentence. When you actually speak or listen, it is rarely the case that each sentence is completely different like the vocabulary books. Therefore, ideally, you should understand English vocabulary through long sentences and listening. To do that, I would suggest reading or listening to the sentences that conform to the English vocabulary books. In fact, the Eiken Pastan book I introduced earlier is very useful here too. When you use the Pastan, the words there are also used in the Eiken過去問 books. So if you memorize the sounds and meanings in Pastan, you can train yourself to memorize the words in context by using the sentences and the listenings in Eiken過去問 books. When doing that practice, although reading is also effective, I recommend listening to those who want to speak English. The way to be practiced would be first to listen, then understand the meaning, read aloud, overlapping, and shadowing. I've shown this study method in previous videos, so if you're interested, please check that out. Finally, we will make sure that you can use the words. By doing 1 and 2, you can increase your vocabulary a lot. However, many Japanese people can understand vocabulary but cannot speak. Unfortunately, I believe that this is the situation. The reason for this is that it is not yet a usable vocabulary. In order to be able to use the vocabulary, you need to output in the same way you would use it. For example, you can write down a diary of what happened today, or you may practice writing expressions you use at work. For example, today I went to lunch with my friends. I ate curry and rice. It was delicious. I want to go there again. It is like this. If you're unsure about your English grammar, I recommend you ask your English teacher or ChatGPT to correct it for you. How to use ChatGPT to correct your English is explained in another video. If you're having trouble coming up with an idea, you can also use ChatGPT to give ideas for you. Hearing this explanation, you might think, what? Aren't you supposed to use the words you learn to write English sentences? You may think that this is a good idea, and many people recommend you do so, but you don't have to do this. Why is this so? Have you ever thought about what it is to really be able to use English words? The answer is to be able to use the word without being aware of it. In other words, instead of, I've learned this word, so let's write with it. Let's write something. Oh, I've learned this before, so let's use it, is better. This is because this is actually how we speak and write. If you write English sentences in ways such as, I've learned this word, so let's write with it, you will have to write a huge amount of English sentences if you're learning a lot of vocabulary. This will be effective if hard work pays off. But from a memorization point of view, it is said to be inefficient. Because if you write English sentences with the words you've learned, you focus on writing the English sentences and not on the words. And you will end up not being able to memorize the words. Some researchers say that there's a possibility of inhibition of word learning by doing such methods. So I recommend making English sentences for those words you can't remember. And basically write in such a way as, let's write something, oh, I learned that word, so let's use it. In order to do this, it is necessary to simultaneously do 1, 2, and 3. By doing 1 and 2, you stockpile the knowledge so it is easier for you to output in 3. If English writing is still difficult for you, you can reference these vocabulary lists. Course Spoken 700 and 2,800 words. These are the words lists that I have introduced in the beginning of the video. Since these vocabulary lists are essential vocabulary words, the word that you would use in daily life will be definitely in there. So you can use that as a reference before you write. You can download these vocabulary lists from the description section. But it is not designed for Japanese, so there's no Japanese translation. Also, there are no example sentences or even audio. I think these are useful vocabulary lists to have, so I made Japanese translation, example sentences, and audio for Japanese learners. If you want this vocabulary list essential for English speaking, you can register from my official line in the description section and get it. You can also use this as a check to see how many words you already know. These are the premises and practices to get vocabulary like a returnee. To summarize briefly, the two premises were, first, memorize English words broadly and shallowly. Second, classify known English words into 3 categories. And the 3 study methods corresponding to these categories were memorizing sound and meaning, memorizing in context, and memorizing by using. Some of you may think that English vocabulary learning is only the first one. Actually, that's right. Developing a spoken vocabulary is not just knowing the words. It is meaningful only when you can use it for speaking and listening and etc. Words are learned by doing seemingly non-vocabulary learning. You may have noticed, but doing this will improve your skills other than vocabulary. It is inefficient to study only vocabulary when you want to develop your spoken vocabulary. If you do that, you'll be forever in a state where you know a lot of words but you can't speak or listen. However, by remembering, practicing, and continue what I have introduced you in this video, you'll be able to get the same vocabulary skills as returnees. I will continue to show you how to speak like a returnee, so if you're interested, please subscribe to my channel. I've posted a video on speaking before, so please check that out too. Till then, see you in the next video.